Hi again and welcome back to MisoDog TV channel, and today we will be talking about how to get into Japan on the residence track. So let's get started. So this is a presentation on your path on the residence track. And first, this is our little ninja guy. Yeah. We'll be discussing the introduction. So for those of you who may not know, a residence track, there's two different tracks you can enter into Japan at the moment. One is the business track and one is the residence track. And today we'll be discussing the residence track. And unfortunately at the moment, tourism or short-term visitors are not allowed into Japan. But for those who are coming here to study or work, this is for you. So let's get started. So as I mentioned before, this is an introduction for the business residence tracks, but for this video, we'll focus mainly on just the residence track. But just to give an overview of what the differences are between the two, we'll just talk about it a little bit here. So first, the business track. So business track just allows people who have business come into Japan and do short-term business trips, and who come here often frequently. And currently, it's only available for a limited amount of countries, so Singapore, Korea, Vietnam, and China. But for most people, rather than the business track, they'll want to go on the residence track. And the residence track is for people who are entering with a regular valid visa, so the visa is already sponsored by their company or the school. So this is what most people will be coming in on. And now these are some examples of how people would come in on these different tracks. So for business tracks, this is, as I mentioned before, your company that you work at overseas goes to Japan frequently and does business. But for residence track, this is for people who are working at a company, who are starting to work in a Japanese company, or they're going to exchange program from overseas into Japan, or individuals who are here who want to do a language course, a language study, or do a master's degree or something in Japan. So these are the different situations that you would use the two different tracks. But today, like I mentioned, we'll be focusing on the residence track, since most people who are coming to Japan will be coming in on the residence track. Okay, so now that the introduction's done, on to the next station, which is required documentation and just getting things ready for your trip to Japan. So this is pretty much all the things that you need to do before you get on the plane. Okay, and then just to cover really quickly, what the differences are between short-term business and for mid to long-term residence track. We're just going to cover in both. So as you can see over here, is you'll need a visa application, your passport, as well as a certificate of employment for the applicant. So that's you. This is coming from the company, and then an invitation letter from the company as well, and then a letter of guarantee, as well as a written pledge. So written pledges are something that's new because of the whole coronavirus situation, COVID-19 situation. So this is actually a pledge saying, I won't break any of the rules while I'm in quarantine, and my company is, vouching on my behalf. And then also for business, this is also special. You need a schedule of activities in Japan, so your schedule, itinerary, what you'll be doing. And then optional is private medical insurance, because you never know what's going to happen. And not only because normal travel situation, but also the whole coronavirus situation. Okay, so this is just a brief overview of the short-term business track. And next we'll cover the mid to long-term stay. And then this is the residence track. So as before, you need your visa application, you need your passport, valid passport, and you need a certificate of eligibility again, and then the letter of guarantee, and once again you need a written pledge, and you need 2 copies of these, I believe, and it's been recently updated as the business track version, so please make sure you have the updated versions of those. And the written pledges will need to be signed by your the company or the school that you'll be coming in on. If you don't have that, then you can't come into Japan, or be very difficult because you'd have to go through jump through a couple hoops and get in special circumstances. And then once again, optional is private medical insurance. And this is really important for long-term people as well, because you can't get into the national health insurance until you register with your ward office, your city office, with your residence card as well. And during that 14-day quarantine period, you're not allowed to leave your hotel room or your accommodation to do that. So during that 14-day period, if anything happens, you have the private medical insurance to cover any expenses that you may need. And that you can get this at the airport, or sometimes some people were able to get it through their travel agencies. You can also probably get it through your own insurance back in the US, or whatever country you're coming from. Sorry, I'm from the US. So please, this is not required, but it's been recommended by many people, just to be on the safe side until you can get into the national health insurance system. Okay, so in addition to your luggage and all that sort of stuff, please make sure you have these documentation ready for you, ready when you come into Japan for immigration. So now, this is right before you leave. So this is not the passport application stuff, but also things that you need to do before. So for now, I'm just going to cover the residence track and not the business track. So for the residence track, of course, apply for your visa, get your certificate of eligibility. You need to get your written pledge, 2 copies as I mentioned before. So a certificate of negative COVID-19 test result, which needs to be done 72 hours before your departure flight to Japan. So all domestic flights it doesn't include the domestic flight, so it's not 72 hours from your first domestic flight if you have any connections, but 72 hours before your flight that leaves to Japan from the country. And then also you need to reserve transportation and your accommodation for quarantine. So if you're going to be staying at your own place in Japan because you're coming back from overseas, that's fine. But if you're not, you're new to Japan, you need to set up a hotel or some sort of accommodation to stay at. So this can be something your company supplies you or sets up for you, or something that you have to set up for yourself. So you have to make sure you check that out first. So if you're coming in through exchange program or through a company, contact them, ask them if they're going to set it up for you. Otherwise, you have to do it yourself. And that also includes transportation, which I'll go over later on. But just to let you know, regarding transportation, public transportation is a no-go. So you can't use public transportation to get to your quarantine accommodation, and also you can't use shared housing for your accommodation. So any of those shared houses you're not able to use. It has to be somewhere where all the bathroom and the kitchen and such are in one room, and you won't be interacting with other people. And then you need to stay at that quarantine accommodation for 14 days, as I mentioned before, and you cannot leave except to pick up food or drinks, essentially. So what a lot of people do is they either go to the convenience store really quickly, or they go to a supermarket and then rush back to the hotel, or of course Uber Eats is available in Japan, so you can always use Uber Eats too. Okay. And one thing too is that if you're not able to schedule private transportation, or you're not able to walk to your hotel and such, and since public transportation is not available, you can also rent a car and drive yourself. That's an option as well if you're comfortable with driving in Japan. Okay, next, so you got all of that stuff ready. You got your application, you got the written pledge signed, you got the test form, you registered your hotel and such. You're good to go. So now you're on the plane, you'll receive some forms, but then you arrive. Okay, so as I mentioned, you'll get some forms while on the plane. So you'll get a questionnaire on the plane. You have to fill that out before you get into immigration. And then one thing that we recommend is to gather all your documentation and everything in an easy accessible area, so that you won't have to dig through your luggage or your carry-on when you're going through the COVID-19 testing as well as the immigrations. Okay, and then once you arrive in Narita, Haneda, Kansai International Airport, you'll have to do a PCR test. And this is essentially, you will spit into a vial and then they'll check it out. And then the whole process, we interviewed a couple people, or quite a few people regarding this, and we found that for most individuals, from stepping off the plane to getting their luggage is approximately 2 hours or less. So plan for that when you make your reservations for transportation, because that's very important. You don't want to have the people come too early and have to wait because they might leave, or you don't want them to come too late and you have to wait. Now, next is we'll discuss about the PCR test. So the PCR test, as I mentioned, you conduct this test immediately after getting on the plane, and so you'll be, depending on the airport you arrive in, you might get papers, showing you what the process. Otherwise, if not, once you step off the plane, there'll be airport staff to tell you where to go. Okay, but generally, everyone will need to do a PCR test once you come into Japan. The test will most likely be a spit test. You'll need to just spit into a vial, as I mentioned before, or motion before. And then, if you're not able to produce enough spit, then you'll have to do the nasal swab test. So make sure you have enough spit to fill up the vial. And for the results of the PCR test, it can get from 30 minutes to 1 to 2 hours. So it really varies depending on when you arrive and how many people are also taking the test. And then once the result is ready, you'll either be called by audio, like they'll call your number, which is written on the vial and paperwork that you'll receive when you take the test, or you'll have to monitor a TV screen to see if your number's been called. And once your number's been called, you'll go to the desk that they assign you to, and then they'll tell you the results of the test and also ask you any questions about your health. Okay, and then hopefully once you're negative, you can proceed on to immigration. If you're positive, then you'll have to go through some extra procedures as well to take you to the side, and then you'll have to go through some other process. Okay, so we'll assume that you tested negative for this PCR test as well, in which case you'll head on over to immigrations. And immigrations is a fairly standard procedure as before, so you won't have to do anything else except provide the extra paperwork. But there are some things that they'll ask you in addition, and we'll cover that right now. So as I mentioned, you present your documentation as well as a questionnaire and such that you filled out. And then some things that you might be asked about, besides the normal, business or pleasure, blah, 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 is, do you have a Japanese phone number? And also, do you have an email address that they can contact you about to receive updates or to give you updates on the whole COVID-19 situation? And also smartphone applications, whether you have these 3 smartphone applications installed and can use them. So one is called Cocoa, and this is a tracing app, COVID-19 tracing app that Japan uses. And it's pretty much, I don't want to say mandatory, but the government highly recommends everyone to install it. And the immigrations people will ask you as well. In most of the people that we interviewed, they did confirm, yes, I was sort of asked, did I install this? Or if I hadn't, please install it in arrival. There were a few people who weren't asked this though. So your mileage may vary. Okay, next is Line application. So you have WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, and such, but in Japan, most people use Line to communicate, and unfortunately Line requires a Japanese phone number. So many people probably don't have this installed yet, but if you do have a Japanese phone number available or ready, then luckily you can install this application and set it up. But this is one method that the government uses to keep track of health check-in updates for the people in quarantine. We also heard about companies asking their employees for like a Japanese phone number, or if the individual are not able to have a Japanese phone number by the time they come here and not install the Line application, then the company will notify the government instead of the individual and update the government of the individual's health status and conditions. Okay, and last but not least is Google Maps. So this one, not many people have been asked of, but this is essentially just the government would like individuals who have Google Maps installed to also have the locations be able to be tracked so they can see where the individual goes in case they need that data. So this is just only for quarantine, so just a local location information during quarantine for the individual. Once again, not many people have been asked this, and not many people know about this really, and I can imagine some people aren't very comfortable with this, but just be prepared that, in the case that you are asked to, that you have, Google Maps installed, as well as know how to check if the location information is being recorded. Okay. So hopefully once that's all done, you're done with immigrations and you're ready to go. But first, let's go over a few tips that might be able to help, that might help your, that whole process, PCR tests and immigrations go by a little bit more smoothly. So one thing is, what some people say is, and this is something you might have to do way in advance, is, try and sit in the front of the airplane. That way you can get off first and you can get to the PCR tests as soon as possible. Okay. Next is drinking water. And this is something that most people don't really think of, but you do get dehydrated on the plane if you don't drink anything. And if that happens, then you won't be able to produce enough saliva or spit for the test. So what some people recommend is to drink, not a whole lot of water, but enough water so that you're able to produce enough saliva or spit for the test, because no one wants to do the nasal swab. Okay. And then next is, you might be asked a few things, such as, as I mentioned before, your Japanese phone number, as well as phone applications, smartphone apps. So make sure you have that ready. If you have the applications installed, or, I don't have it, but my company is going to be contacting the government instead of me, but I'll be notifying them of my status every day. That's service time. Yeah. So hopefully, you're able to do the PCR test, you test negative, you're able to go through immigration smoothly, and you're able to pick up your luggage. So now you're off to your quarantine place. So now you're leaving the airport. Okay, and what do you need to know about leaving the airport? So these are a few things you need to be aware of. So transportation from the airport. And as I mentioned before, public transportation is a no-go. So make sure you have your own private transportation, or you're able to do something. So, or get to your hotel some other way. So here, one method is, private car. You have your family, friends, acquaintance or someone, or you can rent your own car. And then one is a private car service. So there's, recently there's been a lot of these car services where you can make reservations and they'll pick you up at the airport and drop you off at your hotel or accommodation. And this does not include Uber. So some people, if you look online, some people say, oh, I've used Uber and it's fine, or oh, I heard Uber is okay. But to be on the safe side, Uber is kind of a gray area. So we recommend not using Uber, but rather a ride transportation service that's made specifically for the coronavirus situation. Okay. There's also special shuttle buses. So depending on the airport you come in, there might be some shuttle buses that go to certain hotels, and your hotel might be there as well. This is really, some people were able to ride it, other people weren't. So we recommend checking online to see if the airport that you'll be arriving in does provide this service to the hotel that you will be going to. Okay. And then one other option is to walk. And this may sound ridiculous, but there are hotels nearby some of the airports that you're able to walk to. They're within maybe 5 to 30-minute walking distance. So you can always do this option. Of course, you'll have your luggage with you. So, depending on how much luggage you have and how tired you are, you might not want to do this. But of course, if you want to save some money, or if you're unable to do transportation, or you kind of forgot, this is always an option. Okay. And then this is actually something that just came up recently. It's special transportation to certain hotels. And right now it's only for buses. So we got this news from NHK, it just came out December 6th. And supposedly the service will start December 16th, and it'll be from Narita and Haneda. And they'll provide special buses that will go to 12 specific hotels 3 times a day. And this is still not set in stone, so please, if you're coming to Japan or after the 16th, it's always a good idea to check online to see if this information has been updated and if the hotel that you're planning on staying at is on there, or you can just book a hotel for one of the hotels that it stops at. And then it's not official yet, but at the moment they're also considering trains and airplanes, being able to go to other places using those modes of transportation with certain limitations. So one limitation that is possible that we've heard is that for trains, they'll have a separate car specifically for individuals coming in from overseas and then going to their quarantine places. So once again, this is not set. These are not set yet, so please check online for any updated information. So some things to be aware of is you cannot share your transportation with other people besides your immediate party. So you can't share, you can't be like, hey, do you want to ride? Can't you ride with me? Split this cab. No, that's not possible, unfortunately. But if you're traveling with family members, you can share a large van, and once again, it has to be a private transportation company or a rental car. Then, like I mentioned before, public transportation is no good. And it's also recommended that you arrange the transportation before you arrive in Japan. So you can do this either through, separately on a transportation website, like go to the ride service website and then do the reservation there, or you can book through an agent, or depending on the travel agent that you're using, you can also book through them as well. Okay. Now, you left the airport, you're on your way to your quarantine place. What do you do now? Okay. So now we'll cover the quarantine period. Okay, so as I mentioned before, the quarantine period is 14 days. And you won't be able to leave this area or your accommodation except to pick up food and drinks, those sort of or if you have to go to the hospital, But otherwise, taking walks or going to pick up, electronics or cell phone or something of the sort is not allowed, technically allowed. Okay. And during this time, you may be contacted by the government, the city office or ward office. You'll be contacted by either phone if you give them your phone number, or through line. And if so, they might contact you for line. We've heard that people who contact the government through line will have to do it every day, every morning. Take their temperature, give their condition and such every morning. Otherwise, for phone calls, it's not every day. It might be every day, but most of the people that we interviewed, it's not every day, but every few days. And in some cases, we heard people not being contacted at all. So it really depends on your situation and I guess the government where you're going to be living. So please be aware of this. So one thing to do is to at least make sure you might have a thermometer with you, or be prepared to at least give your health conditions every day. Okay, so now you're done with quarantine. 14 days is done. What's the next step? Next step is getting out of there. Okay, and this is the goal. So you're done with quarantine. You finished your 14 days. Congratulations, you're free. Okay, so now that you're able to leave quarantine, you can go to your final stay. So you can go to your apartment, or you can go finish your travel from Tokyo or Osaka to Hokkaido, Kyushu, or wherever you needed to go. And then during that time, now that you're able to leave the hotel and you can travel freely, you can do things that you need to do. And we'll cover a few of these things. So these are some things that we think that you will need to do after you finish your quarantine period. So first and probably foremost important is to go to the ward office or city hall and get your residence card updated with your permanent address, or at least the address that you'll be staying at for a while until you find the permanent address. And this usually needs to be done, within a week or 2 weeks of arriving in Japan. But because of the whole virus situation, city officials will know that you've been in quarantine and you weren't able to leave, so you shouldn't have any problems doing this. But this is very important. Okay, and then once you've done that, you can get the rest of your things set up. So one thing we recommend is setting up a bank account. That's always good, especially if you're starting work here. You'll need to get paid. You'll get paid, and you need to have the company send the money somewhere. Okay. Also, another thing, if you already have your housing set up, that's perfectly fine. But for other people, get your housing situation situated. So that means not only the place where you're staying, but your water, electricity, gas, internet, and so on. Okay. And then also a phone number. So the order might be a little bit off because some people say to get a bank account I need a phone number, or to do the housing things I need a phone number. So it might be good to get a phone number first if you haven't done so already. So some services, some companies allow for pickup of their SIM cards with a Japanese phone number at the airport. So you can get that before you go to quarantine, which actually saves a lot of time, because then you don't have to worry about where am I going to go after quarantine. you can get everything set up. Plus, not to mention, you can do a lot of the banking, set up a bank account and housing things online. So if you have a phone number before you arrive in quarantine, then you can get all that stuff done in during the 14 days in your quarantine. Because really, besides doing remote work, if you can, there isn't much else you can do during the 14 days except read a book or watch movies or something. So it's always good to get this sort of stuff done ahead of time. So check online to see what companies provide this service where you can pick up a cell phone SIM card at the airport. Okay. I believe one of our videos we do cover this as well, so you can look at that as well in the meantime. Okay. So hopefully that gives you a good idea of what to expect when you come to Japan, what things you need to get done to get on the resident track, as well as what you need to do before and during the whole quarantine period as well. So I hope this is useful for you, and thank you for watching again. I know this video was a bit longer, but there's a lot of things to cover. So if you have if you need any more information, if you're unsure about a few things that we didn't cover in the presentation, we highly recommend you either asking your Japanese embassy or consulate in your country to get more information on what I need to do, especially visa situations, and the whole written pledge is really confusing for certain individuals. Otherwise, you can also check the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. They usually update their information with the current forms and things that you need to know about. Also, recently, Facebook groups have been really helpful. So there's the Return to Japan support group, as well as a few other support groups as well that is essentially all about helping people either get back to Japan from overseas, or people who are just coming to Japan for the first time, what sort of things they need to do, as well as other people sharing their experiences. So that's always helpful and highly recommended we highly recommend you to check that out as well. But for an overview, overall information, hopefully this was useful for you. If you have any questions or if you have any comments, if you want to share your experience as well, please feel free to do so in the comment section below. But otherwise, thank you for watching again, and see you next time. Goodbye.